Welcome to the Second Bite podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome back to the Second Bite podcast. We have an excellent episode today. I am terming it The Road Less Traveled to CEO. Patrick Briggs from Semify is on with me today. Patrick, super happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
You like my title? It's unique and interesting, isn't it?
I love it. Unique and interesting is the name of the game.
Well, I will say this. A lot of the folks that we have on as guests are founders, and that's a pretty standard, here's how I become CEO. And yours has been quite different, right? Mm-hmm. You're a Red Hawk from the Miami of Ohio. You went on to a famous MBA school at Columbia, and then you started your career. And I want to just kind of walk through that and see what you learned along the way. When did you know that someday I'm going to grow up and be the CEO of my own shop and on from there? But your first gig out of school, you were at Zazzle. Can you just take me through that? And then you did 7 years you were 7 years at Zazzle. You were 7 years of growth and marketing positions at a couple of different places. Was all that thought through well in advance? Maybe how did it happen? Take me through the early days of the Briggs career, please.
If anyone says they have it all figured out, like I would love to buy that person a cup of coffee because like I just don't, I didn't have it that figured out. When I came I went to school I grew up in California, but I went to school in Ohio. One, because I thought it would be interesting to change our perspective. I was a native Californian. And went to school in Ohio, but then came back to California to work in a startup in the startup craze kind of time period. I started at Zazzle as a front-end developer on their UI team and worked in that for a couple of years before kind of moving to the marketing team. And really, I think the person that moved me over from the marketing team, I really think he was trying to get a developer basically on the marketing team, is my read of it now. And because then he could get more marketing code deployed. And so, but I liked it. Like marketing was always a little bit of a different, it's a much more different challenge than engineering, right? Engineering is a kind of a vector format to it, right? Like here is a specific thing to solve. Marketing is, because you're dealing with people, it's much more emotion based and more incentive based, more empathetic to where the person is in their journey as a customer. And did that for a number of years at Zazzle. Ended up pretty much running the retention team, but I also kind of worked hand in hand with a guy named Josh, who who developed our entire paid search, paid social, and organic traffic strategy. And then, as you said, moved to New York and all that stuff. But to answer your question more pointedly, like, hey, how does a guy go into the CEO seat from a different route instead of being an entrepreneur? I was, to be very frank, I was kind of jaded on entrepreneurship. My entire career previous to Semify was in startups, right? Zazzle was a startup, and I joined Zazzle. It was a pretty smallish company. I think we were like 60 or 70 employees. And when I left, it was like 400, 450 employees. So we grew quite a bit. And I was like, wow, that's incredible, right? And I have stock in Zazzle and all that stuff. And then I went to a really small startup in New York. Like we were 5 people in a warehouse in Brooklyn. And then I went to another startup in New York. And then I went to another startup in New York. It was slightly bigger, better funded. I think that was one time we were in New York, 4 companies or something. No, 5 companies. And then I went to another one after that. And what I kind of learned is years of spending, I started building, lots of building, like very much an entrepreneurial mindset, right? Like all these companies, I joined them, they were smaller when I joined them, they became bigger, like these kinds of things. It was very much an entrepreneur's mindset, but it's really tough when you don't have product market fit nailed, or your marketing nailed, or any of these kinds of things. And it's really hard to scale those organizations because you have to get so many things right. And what kind of jaded me on it is that, like, the math isn't really favorable for entrepreneurship. I love entrepreneurs. I think that they have an incredible way of dealing with adversity, right? Like it's hard to start a company, incredibly hard to start a company. But what I realized is that the math is not in their favor. And there's for everyone that's successful, there's 100 that aren't. And that got me kind of jaded on being an entrepreneur myself, right? That was kind of why I went to Columbia. Was like, hey, I'm going to round out my skill set. Then I can go start a company and I'll figure it out. And what I realized at Columbia is that actually there's an easier way to do it, which is you can round out your skill set, go join a firm like Broadtree, and then they'll go put you in a company that's already working. And so when I kind of learned about that model, I was like, whoa, this kind of shortcuts that whole step of like, hey, let me try to start something. Well, okay, I've got a 1 in 100 chance of making that successful. Or I can go join a company that's already doing well, but still needs the skill sets that I have as an entrepreneurial minded person. How do I scale? How do we grow? Those kinds of things. But I have the benefit of I don't have to worry about, am I going to make payroll this week? Or am I going to have money to go on that business trip? Those kinds of things. And that to me was a much more alluring way of entering into the kind of entrepreneurial market than specifically trying to start something on my own.
So I think that's interesting because there's a kind of a world out there that is the search fund world, where guys are pursuing an opportunity where they can buy, and then they have a network of people that hopefully will make an investment in what they're doing in the rest. And what you have done with Broadtree is different. For our listeners, David, the founder of Broadtree, was on a podcast a couple episodes ago. So if you just go back in the show notes and look up Broadtree, you can hear the story of Broadtree and their worldview and how they approach, solving this problem. Do you remember, Patrick, going back early days? How did you first learn about Broadtree?
I learned about them from Columbia, from an entrepreneurship class who introduced me to the concept of that. But what happened was I was actually going to raise my own fund when I left Columbia, which is again like this kind of entrepreneurial mindset.
So when you say raise your own fund, you were going to take the traditional route of being a search funder.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Okay. And I met this lawyer through the process of doing this, and this lawyer, he's great. He's actually still our lawyer today.
And what's his name?
John Gilson.
John Gilton.
Gilson, Gilson. He's from a law firm called Holland and Knight.
Holland and Knight, big firm. John Gilson.
Yeah,
excellent.
Fantastic. I can't talk how highly enough about John. And hopefully he'll give us a discount now that.
And for anybody that wants to, we'll have John Gilson's contact information in the show.
Yeah. So I called John up and I was like, hey, help me with fund formation, all that kind of stuff, which he certainly would have done. But he goes, look, John, part of the reason I love him, he's a real brass tacks kind of guy. And he's like, look, you got the operator mindset. I believe once you get in the seat, you're going to do a fantastic job. You don't know your head from the tail when it comes to a deal. And I'm worried you're going to screw it up. I'm paraphrasing. That wasn't his exact words, but something to that effect. And he's like,
and a fair concern though, right?
Absolutely fair concern. My understanding of how to get a deal done was 100% academic. I've taken a lot of deal classes at Columbia, but never been on a live deal ever. And so it's absolutely a fair concern. And frankly, I think he was right. After I did the first deal with Semify and Broadtree, I was like, hey, there was a lot of things that if Broadtree hadn't been there, I would have zigged when I was supposed to zag. So he was the one that introduced me to I think it was Brad at Broadtree at first, or maybe it was Johannes, I can't remember. And said, hey, meet these guys. They're going to help you get the deal done. And then you can do what you're going to be good at, which is being in the operating seat. And John, to his credit, was 100%.
Yeah. And one of the things so just to fast forward the conversation some, so Broadtree has a dedicated fund, and they're for proper terms, a private equity group. They would use what they call an operator model. So they have guys on the bench they call them executives in waiting, that when they find a good idea or when you find a good idea, they can acquire that business and then figure out the best role for you to play in that business, whether it's CEO, CFO, COO, CMO, whatever the case may be. Am I describing that accurately?
You nailed it on the head.
Okay. So you interviewed with Broadtree. At that time, as you compare it to starting my own fund and then figuring out all the stuff on my own, what were the 2 or 3 attributes of the approach through Broadtree that you liked the most?
Yeah, great question. So I kind of think of it as from a decision tree framework, right? Like, okay, do I start my own fund and collect a bunch of investors, or do I use my own money, or do I go with like a Broadtree, right? So those are kind of the 3 decisions, right? Well, what has the highest probability of close, or what has a greater than 50% chance of probability of close? Okay, well, if I start my own fund and collect some investors, those investors have a ton of feedback from me potentially, and they may make me zig when I don't want to zig, or zag when I don't want to zag, or those kinds of things. And so that might lower my probability of close. And there's a lot of data on this that you can go read. But if I start my own fund, then I don't have to worry about that. And it was also similar with Broadtree. And a lot of my conversations with Broadtree was really about like, well, how choose your own adventure is this? Can I really be the master of my destiny? And to their credit, they're like, yeah, absolutely. Like, pitch a concept, and if you can really make that concept compelling, you're going to be able to pursue that concept. And so that got rid of the traditional route. And then I've got still I'm going to use my own money and do this, or I'm going to go work with Broadtree to do it, right? And then it's like, well, then the question is, well, what's the risk profile, right? Or you could say, what's the certainty of close? Those are either 2 branches on the decision tree you want to go for. Risk profile, very high if you're using your own money. Very low if you're using institutional money, because there's a lot more rigor around the investment. Or you could say certainty of close. Do I know how to get a deal done? Well, no, I didn't at the time. So on any of those kinds of things. And so really either certainty of close or risk mitigation, whatever you want to call it, pushes towards, hey, let me do this Broadtree model and not do it on my own to protect myself from making 1, a bad deal, and 2, using my entire pool of capital to do an investment. And frankly, I had some money at the time, but not a lot. And so I wouldn't have been able to do the size deal that Semify was.
Right.
And so I would have had a smaller business. Smaller businesses are riskier than bigger businesses, just by the nature of the size of the business. And so there were a lot of reasons why trying to do it on my own would have been too risky. And then when I had a conversation with Broadtree, I understood that hey, I really had an opportunity to choose my own adventure, right? Like the type of deal I did, Semify, is a very unique deal, but I had conviction in it, and I pushed it to Broadtree and made the case for it. And they, to Broadtree's credit, they were totally on board with it and supportive of that. And that's exactly what they said they were going to do, and they did it.
And lo and behold, as a quick side note, from the banker's perspective, certainty to close is a big issue. Nobody wants to get halfway through due diligence or almost all the way through due diligence and have a problem with their buyer. The problem with their buyer because they didn't raise enough money, because they couldn't get a debt commitment, because in a group of outside investors, 2 of them don't agree, 5 of them do agree. And so when I consider those factors, when I go to a group that has a checkbook, that knows how to close deals and have closed many of them, the risk to close goes way, way down. Mm-hmm. And so when I consider multiple offers, as we often do for clients, that just makes me much more comfortable. And so I think it's fair to say that those buyers oftentimes will have a selection over a traditional search fund or a small guy doing his first deal, for God's sakes.
Yeah, there's no question about that.
So now one of the great trade-offs I know is how much equity. So if I go put all of my life savings at risk, I guess, and I find it and I develop it and all, I can have all the equity. Mm-hmm. My guess is you would have all the equity in something much, much smaller versus a smaller amount of equity in something much larger. Can you comment on kind of how that worked out? And because in the prior episode with David, he talked about that they always give equity to their executive in residence because they need him to have skin in the game for their approach to work effectively.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right. Like, if I had gone the high risk approach with smaller business, I'd own the entire thing, or not the entire thing, but a big chunk of it. But if I go the lower risk, more supported model, I have a smaller stake in certain. There's no question. My stake is significantly smaller, but that's okay, because if you look at it from a risk adjusted return basis, like on what is the value creation that I can generate on actual dollars, it's significantly higher than what I can generate on my own. Maybe not, right? Maybe there's these low probability scenarios where I can make like a ton of money. But generally speaking, on a if you look at what the average potential return is, I'm obviously going to make more money even on a small percent of equity.
And I would also think that a guy who's had one or two successes in the past could perhaps negotiate then a better equity split or get better funding from whoever the group is, because have become a known quantity from taking the ABC company from a certain dollar amount to a larger and then selling it and so on and so forth. But as a place to start as a first time CEO seems like a place to get into what I would call a real company with size and scope and support from a financial group. So if we shift a little bit to Semify, first of all, I'm curious who found Semify, but then can you just describe what Semify is and who you serve?
So Semify was founded by Chad Hill and Adam Setzer. Adam is still our CIO or Chief Information Officer today. And Semify started out as a direct SEO business. I actually don't remember the year. That's kind of embarrassing. But moved to what's called the reseller model or the white label model, which is effectively we sell SEO services, we sell paid search services, paid social services, and then map pack services, which is kind of a derivative of SEO, basically. And those services are offered on a white label basis to other agencies or other partners. And so we don't actually sell direct, right? People come to our websites and if you're not an agency, you don't have access to those services, right? And so we partner with hundreds of agencies across the country, and we enable their SEO division or their paid search division or their paid social division. All completely under the covers, like nobody knows, and we don't ever talk about our customers, and we don't ever talk about being front and center. We are the back office to hundreds of agencies, and we want to be their best kept secret. Because what we do well is the operations side. We have a really small sales team. They're fantastic, but we're not out there pounding the pavement every single day. Our job is to be good at operations, and the majority of our team is an operations team. And we say, hey, we have software, we have service and training, all these kinds of things to be good at delivering service to our customers so they can deliver service to
right.
them.
And they can manage the relationship.
That's right, exactly.
And so tell me about the transaction, right? How did you find Semify? And I'm assuming one owner wanted to get out and the CIO wanted to stay on board and they wanted to get bigger. Can you elaborate on all those?
So Chad had already left the business when I first met Adam so many years ago. And how did I find them? Well, let's see. I don't remember the specific source that I used to find them. But I had a bit of an engineering background, as I said earlier. And so I wrote a lot of little custom applications for myself to find companies, and Semify was one of the companies that I found. And I remember I had the first call with Adam in, I think it was August or July of 2021.
And can I ask, Patrick, are you already associated with Broadtree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good point.
So you connected with Broadtree. So let me take one step back if I can. you connected with Broadtree and they said, all right, Patrick, you go hunt the stuff down. And when you find something, come bring it to us? Or is there a closer relationship than that?
Yeah, the way I would describe it is you're kind of like on the deal team of the private equity group. And
so do they pay you a salary and you're an employee?
You're a full-time employee, Broadtree, health benefits, salary, all this stuff.
Nice.
And, there's training. I was flying down to Charlotte and trainings in Orlando and stuff like that all the time. Which is great. And certainly things I needed, right? Like, again, no deal team experience. So that you're getting all this deal training. And so, but yeah, like every week we're meeting as a team and discussing the deals, and it's called IC, or investor committee, all private equity have, and you're pitching your deals and stuff like that. But yes, they had a system for how to source deals, but I certainly, again, I have a bit of an entrepreneurial mindset, and so I said, well, I could certainly use the system, but I can also make one that's of my own and services the needs that I have.
And how many opportunities did you bring to Broadtree before Semify?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Like a whole bunch, or just one or two, or
a lot. I don't know. Like, I don't remember the exact numbers, but something to the effect of like 20,000 targets I reviewed within 9 months or something. I don't remember.
So do you ever look back on some, because Semify has been a great success, and we're going to get into that now, but do you ever look back on some and just shake your head and say, man, I'm glad that never happened?
Yes.
Yeah. Which I guess is the power of having, this is one of the things that entrepreneurs miss out on, I think, because they chafe a little bit at the idea of private equity and investment committee and all this other nonsense, but the rigor around that avoids a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, there's a number of I'm a very excitable person, as you probably noticed. And there's a number of companies that I was super excited about that after and that was the power of IC area, or investment committee, is that I bring this deal and I'm like, here's all the reasons I think this would work. And then, usually it was like Johannes or Brad would be like, well, here's all the reasons it won't. It was never Dave. Dave is like me. He's very excitable. And so I'd be like, Dave, what do you think of this? And he'd be like, yeah. And then he's like, what about this? And we'd be like upping each other until it was like crazy. And then Johannes and Brad would be like, well, did you guys think about this? And it was like someone just popped my balloon. I was like, oh, damn, that's right. I completely missed that. And so they were really good about protecting me from, and again, I didn't have this deal experience. So they helping me see around the corner, see a blind spot a little bit. And there's a number of deals like that I was very excited about that had some serious, there was one that had this, after I did the unit economics model on it, we realized it had a huge COVID bug, and it was being priced into the enterprise value. And when we adjusted for that, it was a real risky deal, and stuff like that. So there was a number of deals like that ended up going away because we really kind of understood the business and understood how that works in both the current period as well as previous periods. It was a much more dangerous acquisition.
And so you found Semify, and then so when that deal closed, the cap table or the owners are Broadtree, and then you, and then your CIO. Is that pretty much it?
Pretty much, yeah.
Got it. And so, and this would be interesting. So then you sit down with your team, the three of you, or however many are on Broadtree, and you have meetings that say, how do we grow the value of this enterprise?
Mm-hmm.
And there's inorganic, which means acquisition and the rest. There's organic. How do we cross-sell? How do we get into new markets? How do we hire salespeople? Do you remember the kind of the focus of those first couple meetings? Like, what are we going to do right now to grow this business?
First couple of meetings. So I've been running Semify for a little over 2 years now, which is, I kind of think being in the COC is like dog years. So that feels like 8 years. Is that the right number? So I'm certainly going to say a bunch of words about what I think we said in the first couple of meetings, but I don't know that those are accurate, and I don't know that if they stayed up in a quarter long. I think we always, very early on, we knew that both an inorganic and an organic growth strategy were excuse me, opportunities for the business. We did we did our first bolt-on acquisition in August of 22. We closed the deal in December of 21, so 8 months after it closed.
Wow. Okay. And can I ask, if we slow that for a sec, where did that come from, that bolt-on? What did it add to the business? And were you surprised by anything going through that process?
What wasn't I surprised by? Yes. What did it add? Well, we thought it was both an interesting customer opportunity as well as what we're trying to do with all the bolt-ons that we put into the Semify family is that we want both. Obviously, the revenue is exciting and the team is exciting. How do we grow our team? But also we want service add, right? So how do we think that it either helps us deliver our existing services better or expand services? And so Digital Current was the first acquisition, and that was a huge service add for us. It helped us expand our SEO service in a big way. So that was that's our kind of MO for all of the bolt-ons. Excuse me. That we do is it certainly has revenue value, but it needs to add its services.
And so when you do your bolt-ons or tuck-ins, do you require that those founders stay on board and become equity holders as well? Or how do you think about those acquisitions?
It's case by case. We certainly, so with Digital Current, we bought that business from Troy and Eleni Ireland. They were looking to retire. And so, Digital Current being a platform wouldn't have been possible, right? Because there would be too much turnover in the business. But because it was being added into an existing platform, there was a pathway for them to retire. When we bought SEO Reseller the following year, we bought it from someone that was also looking to step away from the business. And again, because they were a competitor and we had complementary services, it was okay for them to step away. And then when we did the agency elevation transaction in August, the two founders have now joined the business on a full-time basis because, one, there's new services that we've added into the infrastructure, so that's a huge deal. But two, there was real need for their expertise in the business, right? They had real expertise that we lack today, so it was really compelling for them to join the company and add value literally day one.
And where's the deal flow coming from? Does Broadtree do that? Do you do that?
The initial deal flow of Semify was certainly kind of a lot of pounding the pavement. There was a lot of deal. One of the things that's really exciting about Broadtree is they have this little deal network, right? That is constantly servicing deals to see. But post close, most of the deal flow has been my pounding of the pavement, and frankly, like it's very, one of the things that kind of endeared me to Adam when we first started this conversation by Semify in the summer of 21 was that I knew the ecosystem, right? Like he certainly had overtures. Like sometimes a successful business, he had overtures from other buyers, but none of them understood the space. And day one, call one, minute one, I knew exactly the space because I'd been working in that space for 15 years.
Right.
And so I could have a substantive conversation with Adam that I think that he wasn't able to have with a lot of other buyers. And so that allowed us to, build a relationship to which we built a transaction on top of. And there's other things too, but without getting into.
And as we sit here in Q1 of 24, what's on the priority list for Semify when you think about other bolt-ons or tuck-ins?
It's the same thing that was on the priority list Q4 of 2021, which was how do we add either competitors, right? So that we can, because we have I think a better mousetrap in terms of how we service the customers, or how do we add new services to our ecosystem to support our existing customers as well as their customers?
And are there new services that are top of your priority list? Capabilities?
Yeah. So with agency elevation, we added paid search and paid social, which was a huge deal. And
you added what?
Paid search and paid social, so PPC and Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, all that stuff. Huge deal. I think there's a ton more opportunity in the video space. So like, how do we enter into the, both CCTV, programmatic, YouTube ads, all that kind of space is super important. I think there's a huge opportunity in the CRM space. So those are areas that we are looking at currently.
Gotcha. And when you think about, so you've been on board for a couple of years, when we talk to private equity guys on the podcast, there's a 5 to 7 year time horizon. Is that kind of what you're operating on with Broadtree?
It's certainly there's no hard and fast rule about when to exit business. It's certainly and it's certainly very organic in terms of what's the market opportunity, how have we grown, and how have we developed this into a new platform. My view is that my focus is on right now. Hey, we see a ton of opportunity with both organic and inorganic growth. And I continue to focus on that. Now, how our capital structure will change as we continue to do inorganic growth will certainly be a conversation we have with the board every quarter. But my focus is 100% on organic and inorganic growth. And I don't see a reason to go aggressive at a sale of the company because we have the structure we need to keep on that mission for at least the next couple of years.
Yeah. And so self-reflection here, when you think about yourself, back in the early days of your career, and now as I think definition would hold up, a successful CEO, what are those
pending success?
What are those skill sets that you find you apply most on a daily basis now that they didn't tell you about in B school, or that you learned from this quote unquote the school of hard knocks?
Yeah. I would refute the quote unquote successful CEO. I think I am very much a work in progress. And the second my mentality as a person is that the second I claim to be successful at anything is when I feel like I'm going to take my proverbial foot off the gas. And so I tend to focus on where I need to improve as opposed to where I think I've done good work. Where I think I need to improve and where I think that the CEO does a lot of work is building a team and managing a team around you. Because certainly I have direct relationships with a lot of folks in the business, but I manage a team that then manages our 210 employees, right? It's giving them the toolkit that they need to be successful, to make those teams successful, to make those teams successful, to get all the way down to the frontline people is the most important thing I can do on a daily basis. Whether that is jumping in and supporting recruiting, or one of the teams I wrote an API call for them, right? Like a dusted off some engineering skill sets, right? I think those things to support the team and you support them on their management journey is a constant learning, as well as to where I add the most value. Certainly things in terms of where I didn't expect the CEO seat to be so leaned into was HR and stuff like that. Tons of work on the HR side every single day. Understanding on how to build culture, right? I think I made huge mistakes when we first closed on the business in terms of how to build culture, and learn from that. It's very humble. Those kinds of things I think are things that they certainly don't teach, at least at Columbia. I don't know if they teach it in other different schools.
Well, that would be, so if you were speaking to a class at Columbia, what would you tell those guys and girls to focus on more or less of as they get their MBA to make them more successful in the world?
Yeah. There's this, I think I'm going to butcher it, but there's this quote the Navy SEALs use, which is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. That is probably the most applicable quote to being in this seat ever. I am I'm an excitable person, right? And so I'm very let's make this change and this change and this change and this change. And man, I can't tell you how many of them bit me in the butt the first 6 months into the seat. And I think that you really gotta, part of what's inherent in that quote is you really gotta understand the processes and get them down before you can move fast on them. And I think that is the biggest, like change is, life is long and change is going to happen because inevitably you're a different person than the previous person running the company. But I think you got to be a little more careful in your first couple of steps. Thankfully, I don't think I made any steps that were majorly detrimental to the business, but I do think that like it is a humbling experience, and like if you just understand that and absorb that a little bit more before trying to make a bunch of changes, you're going to be much more successful than if you just go in, repaint the walls, everyone's wearing uniforms and all this kind of stuff day one. That's going to be a humbling experience.
Well, and on those words of wisdom, I will bring us to a close. This has been a great episode, Patrick. I got out of it really, I think, the behind the scenes view that we really wanted to. So I thank you for sharing openly. For folks that listen to the podcast, as you know, Patrick's information, Semify contact information, Broadtree information is all on the show notes. So you can track Patrick down there. You can also find Patrick Briggs on LinkedIn. And this has just been a wonderful episode, Patrick. So thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.